Are you enjoying studying through this book? What a wonderful narrative. And the book of Joshua, it's about the victory of faith and the glory that comes to God when his people trust and obey. When we trust and obey God, then he gets all the glory. We point to him, and that should be our whole goal, is to point people to his direction. So we've arrived now at chapters 3 and 4, where we're going to see finally the crossing of the Jordan. Now, this wasn't just a small crossing. To put it into perspective, there was about probably 2 million people that crossed over. Now, Temecula, Murrieta, and Menifee is about 300,000 to 400,000 people. The city of San Diego is about 1.3 million, just to give you a little bit of an idea that this isn't just a small task that God is taking on. This is above and beyond anything that we could ever do on our own. This is not even like humanly possible. I mean, we kill people to get into Walmart. Like, seriously. Like, there's no way you could just, 2 million people could organize themselves to come up with some kind of plan like this. But there's so many things, and we have 2 chapters, and you guys will have a lot to study in your small groups. So I'm just going to kind of cherry pick a few little themes from both chapters and go through and highlight a few things. Now, Joshua, of course we know, he was called to be the leader. He was given his authority by God for this time, for these people to fill in the shoes of Moses. And the priests were given very specific jobs, weren't they? They were told to carry the ark. And then the officers, again, very specific jobs. They were to go in and get the people ready and keep everybody informed and tell them to stay away. And you know, with the amount of people, you're like, okay, you know, nobody's rushing the ark. You know what I mean? That's the thing that's going to go before. It's holy. We're to stay back so that we can see it. So, I mean, that just is a lesson alone. Don't get ahead of God. Allow him to go forward first. Allow us to see where he's going and then follow them. Don't you think out of 2 million people, a few men especially had a plan about how they could get across? I know my husband would have built like houses and like bridges. And I mean, you know what I mean? Like our men, well, and we could, like, I've got a better way. You know what I mean? Like, I could probably get there faster. You know, if we planned it, we think we could get there faster, right? We'd be trying to get around it, go ahead of it. I bet I can beat him over there. I'll just see him on the other side like, hey, what took you so long? You know what I mean? Like, that's in our own strength. But they're telling them very specifically, this is what you have to do. But it's interesting what God required of everyone else in the camp. What did he require of everyone else? He says in verse 5, if you're in chapter 3 of Joshua, verse 5 says, and Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. All these things they could have said, and what does God say when he's about to do wonderful things? Sanctify yourself. I'm about to do things you've never seen, you've never experienced, but I want you to purify yourself. That is such a great word to us. That word wonders, it's marvelous, surpassing, to be beyond one's power. It's difficult to do or to understand. He wants to do wonders in our life, things that we won't understand, things that are difficult by anyone's power, but with him, we can do these things if then we sanctify ourselves. It causes a preparation, literally to set ourselves apart from evil and consecrate ourselves to God. This is a spiritual journey that we're on. It's not a journey of this earth. It's a spiritual journey. Our lives are not about what we eat or what we drink or what kind of house we're going to live in or where our kids are going to go to school. All those things obviously need wisdom, but we're on a spiritual journey. Listen to what it says in Matthew 6:25 and 26. It says, for this reason I say to you, do not be worried about your life as to what you will eat or what you will drink, nor for your body as to what you will put in it. Is not life more than food, the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, that they do not sow, nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they? And if you go down in that verse, it says, therefore, do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall I wear? For after all these things the Gentiles seek, for your heavenly Father knows all the needs that you have. But seek first, here's the key, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Have you ever seen, I don't know what movie it was in, but is Judy Garland like, I'll just think about that tomorrow. One of my favorite lines. I say it to Gina all the time, like, Gone with the Wind, I will just think about that tomorrow. And that's scriptural right there. We'll just think about that tomorrow. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. We are to be concerned with God's kingdom and his righteousness. A spiritual battle requires spiritual preparation. Now, the result of that spiritual battle requiring spiritual preparation is that it should change our calendar. I mean, if we're going to get practical, if we are a spiritual battle and we require spiritual preparation, it ought to change the way our calendar looks. One of the things that I think is always a great exercise is to take a list of your priorities. If this is what God says my priorities are, and what is it in my daily life that these are my priorities, and then match that up to your calendar and see, am I spending time on really what I think is important? And you might find that some things in our calendars may need to change. More important than all of that is knowing Jesus and making him known. And the older you get, the more you realize that our time on this earth is very short. The writer, I think it was James, who said our life is but a vapor. And man, we're here for a little while and then we're gone. And that is so true. None of us knows that day that we're going to be with him. Turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 6. We're going to take a look at some scripture here. Deuteronomy chapter 6. And we're going to start in verse 6. And then we'll kind of come back up. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 6 says, And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently. That means to sharpen or to pierce to your children. And shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. Frontlets, they used to wear those phylacteries, and they would put God's word in it, thinking that if the word was attached to their mind, that they would know it because it was close to their mind. And that just, you could insert Awanas there. You know what I mean? Like, you just think about learning God's word, and that our kids need to know. You shall write them on your doorposts, verse 9, and on your house and on your gates. What does that mean? Constant reminders of what we're supposed to be doing with God's word, with our children, with our grandchildren. And then he goes on in verse 10 to caution them against disobedience. So it shall be when the Lord your God brings you into the land of which he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you the large and beautiful cities which you did not build, houses full of goods which you did not fill, hewn out wells which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant. And when you have eaten and are full, when God blesses you, then beware. Beware. Keep guard. Take heed. Watch. Lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. When do we most likely forget the Lord? When we're in a huge time of blessing. When things are going well. When he's blessing us. You know, when we get into trials, it's easy to turn to the Lord. We do it automatically. But in that time of blessing, he's saying, beware, lest you forget who brought you out of Egypt from the house of bondage. And should be our response, verse 13. You shall fear the Lord your God and serve him. And you shall take oaths. And I think of a court of law just saying, I'm willing to stand up and go, I belong to Jesus. And that's going to get more prevalent in our world as things progress, that we're going to have to stand up and take a stand and say, I belong to him, taking an oath in his name. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the people who are all around you. For the Lord your God is a jealous God among you, lest the anger of the Lord your God be aroused against you and destroy you from the face of the earth. I mean, that's some serious words for his people. What did God want them to teach diligently? He says these words that I give you today. What were those words? Look back up at verse 1 in chapter 6 there. It says, now this is the commandment, and these are the statutes and the judgments which the Lord your God has commanded to teach you, that you may observe them in the land which you are crossing over to possess, right where we're at in our story today, that you may fear the Lord your God and keep all his statutes and commandments which I command you, you and your son and your grandson. Grandmas, we have a work to do with our grandkids all the days of your life, and that your days may be prolonged. Therefore, hear, O Israel, and be careful to observe it, that it may be well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord God of your fathers has promised, a land flowing with milk and honey, the land that they are about to possess. It says in verse 4, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. And here's the get. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. We are to love God with everything that we have, our thoughts, our minds, everything that we do, we are to love God with. Now turn back with me to Joshua. We're going to take a look at something in chapter 4 now in verse 19. Chapter 4, verse 19. It says, now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first of the month, and they camped at Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land. What an amazing thing. Think about that. Marvelous, beyond one's power. That's the message they were to relay to the kids. This is something that could not have been done. We crossed on dry land, on a river that was overflowing, that it was beyond its banks. We crossed on dry land. 23, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, as the Lord your God did in the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over, that all the peoples of the earth may know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, and that you may fear the Lord your God forever. What a magnificent, magnificent story that we have here in Scripture. How many of you collect refrigerator magnets? I don't know why we collect them. They're fairly ugly, aren't they? Like most of them, like I have them on the side because I've been walking in, it's like, oh, some of them, I'm like, why did I buy that one? They probably didn't have any other ones that I could take. But what does it do? It reminds us of our vacation. It reminds us of when we had time, just with the family and whatnot. I saw one this morning on my refrigerator, said Yellowstone. We've gone to Yellowstone a couple of times if you've been there. I mean, talk about God's glory. It's just magnificent. Well, you know where the bacteria mat, for those of you who've been there, it's this big, it looks like a flat orange lake, and it's this beautiful colors, just like because of the bacteria, it's all orange and everything. So we had gone and we had been eating ice cream. And so my son goes up and he's like digging in the bacteria mat, right by the sign that says don't touch, we have video of me showing this thing that says don't throw anything. And then across from the video comes this big rock, and it goes in like a mud bath. And I turn around. Yep, that's my son. So he's digging in this thing. So we go to the car, and I turn around, and he's got the spoon in his mouth. And I'm like, weren't you just digging in the bacteria mat? Where he's spitting all the way to the RV, and then he's giving us headlines pastor's son dies from eating bacteria mat, and he's brushing his teeth and his tongue, and it was just the funniest thing. But that little tiny magnet gives me great memories with my family. Well, those are great because all of our vacations are just like that. They all have those, but funny. I saw this little tiny ugly magnet, and it made me smile this morning just thinking about the vacations that we've taken. These 12 stones that they were going to be erecting were supposed to be a testimony, a sign of what God did for them, and they were supposed to be able to share that with their kids. And I want to talk to you a minute about testimony. A testimony of God's faithfulness and power, his protection, his provision, his wonders. That's what a testimony is supposed to do. It's supposed to point people to God, right? It's supposed to point people to God. God gave Joshua a souvenir so that he could share the hand of the Lord. He was able to share the hand of the Lord, that it's mighty and able. And that's what our testimonies are supposed to be. We don't need the convincing. You know what I mean? Our testimonies aren't for us. We're already convinced with our testimonies, but our testimony is to share with somebody else what God does, the magnificent of his book. Most people, if you ask them that don't know the Lord, a lot of times they'll have an idea about God, but then when they start explaining it, you're like, that's not the God of the Bible that you're explaining. Let me tell you what God's done in my life. Testimony is powerful, isn't it? When you see that God's done something in your life, it's huge. Now, they weren't supposed to erect any statues, were they? They weren't supposed to carve any images, and neither are we. There wasn't a monument built to Joshua in Gilgal. Everything was supposed to point to Jesus, and we're supposed to be the same way in our lives, that we can take our testimony and use it to glorify God. When I hear someone's testimony, I want to hear glory going to God. I don't want to hear anything about the person themselves. 1 Peter 3:15 says, "But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is within you with meekness and fear." We're always supposed to be ready with our testimony to anybody who would ask us, what is the reason for your hope? Why do you have hope? Why do you have joy? Haven't you been asked that? Why do you have joy? And we have to answer the question when we don't have joy. Why don't you have joy? We have Jesus. We're supposed to have his peace. As a mom, this was one of my top priorities, and I'm so thankful when I was young that God gave me this wisdom. How many of you still have kids at home? Still, okay, great majority of you still have children at home. We are to teach our children God's word. We are to teach them God's word. We are to have them hide God's word in their hearts. Why? It might come alive later. How many people have memorized God's word, memorized God's word, memorized God's word, and then click, it all makes sense. And then they have that hidden in their hearts. But the wisdom God gave me was it wasn't more important than that, but it was good wisdom that I need to teach my children to see God's power, see him working, not just the words, but the message. And talking about how he works, talking about why he works, talking about where he works, using the testimonies of other people to share their deliverances, to share their victories, to share their sufferings, and then I could then in turn use those things to show my kids God's power. Then they can be witnesses of what he sees. It's hard as a little kid to see God working. I used to ask my kids, do you hear God's voice? Sometimes I would say when they got in trouble, did you hear something right before that maybe told you not to do that? Yes, that was God. That was God speaking you, teaching your children how to hear God's voice. How can they hear it? So that they will be able to sense that power. She talks about in the book, and I thought it was a great illustration, Lincoln's speech. Wasn't that fantastic? She said, you know what, you got the words right, but you missed the message. How many times as moms do we get the words right, but we've missed the message? We missed the message to give our children. Our children may know 88 verses. They might even be able to recite half of the New Testament. But if we miss the message, then we miss the personal relationship that they're going to have, that they need to have with the Lord. And we need to teach them what that looks like, how it works, what it feels like when Jesus talks to them. And they will grow up with a head knowledge, but they won't grow up with a heart relationship for the Lord. I wonder what kind of stories these men told them after the crossing. How did they relay that story? And I'll tell you how that I've seen it happen in our lives. And maybe you can identify, Dad, what's the rocks for? Not now, I'm busy. Dad, what are those rocks over there? I'm working. Don't you see I'm working? Dad, what's the rocks? I'll tell you later. In our context, Mom, why is that lady crying? Don't bother me now. It's none of your business. Why is that? Mom, what's going on over here? Mom, why did God do this? And Mom, 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 Mom. And you're like, blah, like, let me show you the wrath of God. But we know by our text I think it's in the book of Hosea, that they didn't quite get it right, because the next generation worshipped in this place instead of at Jerusalem. They were worshiping in Gilgal, and so they didn't get it right. We're to leave a legacy. My whole goal in life is to leave Jesus on earth when I go to heaven. And that's going to be through my kids, through my grandkids, because they'll be here to share Jesus. I'll be long gone, but they'll still be here. I used to have a saying that I would keep in my head that helped me through this. I would say, Brenda, get to their hearts. And that would be kind of like what I would say for my children. Brenda, get to their hearts. It doesn't matter how much they know. My kids were in Christian school. They did it all. But if I don't get to their heart, then how is that going to help them? Whenever I would see a move of God from far off, maybe I would see someone praying at the altar at church. And if my kid was next to me, I'd go, do you know what they're doing right now? I want them to see the hand of God. They're repenting from a drug addiction. They're turning in all their worldly possessions because they want to follow Jesus. Do you see that person crying over there? They're crying because God just saved their marriage. I want my kids to look around and to see God. God's working all around us. But a lot of times we can't see it. Every single person in this room, you have a God story. You have something God's doing in your life. And we need to help our kids look around and see that. I don't want them just to see people. I want them to see God at work. And it's important. Our testimonies are powerful and they're real. One final highlight. Well, one thing I wanted to tell you also is that I not only wanted them to see God working, I wanted them to serve God at an early age. I'll never forget, we went to our kids when they were younger. I don't know, they maybe were like 10, 12, and 14, and we told them, okay, all of you guys are going to pick an area to serve in. You're going to serve the Lord on a Sundays. We're supposed to be teaching our children how this is all, how we do this thing called Christianity. And so we told them we want you to pray about it. And it was interesting because God put them in different areas than we thought. My one daughter was taking ASL. She ended up interpreting for the deaf. I thought, she'll just go to the nursery and help with the babies. No. My son, we were in, it was a Friday night, and they were doing, he was 10. They were doing auditions for this worship team. So he says, Mom, can I audition to play the guitar? He'd been playing the guitar for like 6 months, I don't know. And you know what? I'm like, knock yourself out, son. Go ahead. So he goes up, he borrows one of the older guy's guitars. He auditions. Well, he gets in the band. So do you know what the band is? It's for the drug and alcohol rehab on a Friday night. Not joking. My 10-year-old son played I don't know how long, and there was older men, and that's when I met Larry Rampetball, because at 10 years old, I would drive my son to Larry's house to practice for the drug and alcohol rehab worship team. And he played there. It was the most hysterical thing. We'd be walking in churches, and these guys with like long hair totally tell out, hey, Scotty, what's up? Just like, hey, man. It's like this big. But you know what? God opened that door for him, and he probably learned more in that time about serving the Lord than any other time in his life. Why? Because he just put himself out there and said, God, where do you want to use me? It's like, well, I could use a guitar player on this Friday night. Now he's still playing guitar, at 24 years old. He's still serving the Lord because he learned how to do it when he was 10. And that is our word for this. One final highlight. When they were bathing him he told them to sanctify themselves, and they were to bathe themselves and reclothe themselves. It was a symbol of that fresh start with God. And I think about this sign that we sort of have, the command that God gives us. What's our sign? What's our fresh start? The thing that we do that God commands us to do when we get saved? Baptism. Burying our old life, being raised anew, God covering our sin from our shame, an outward sign of an inward change, God delivering us out of the bondage of Egypt and into the promised land, the blood of the Lamb taking away our sin. He is worthy. He's the Lamb that was slain on our behalf, and we do that through baptism. Now, remember in our story when Joshua gathered the 12 stones, and not only were they going to put them in Gilgal for the kids, but he also put 12 stones in the riverbed. And I thought, okay, that's interesting because when he leaves, the water's going to come back, and it's going to be filled. And I thought of that about baptism and about the water covering their old life, that was something that was just going to be left behind, that they weren't going to look at, that those stones were going to be buried. Their sin was going to be buried, and they were going to have this fresh start. And I thought about that, about how our life then representative is buried through baptism. Romans 6:1-4 says this, "What shall we say then? Shall we continue to sin that grace may abound? Certainly not. How shall we who died in sin live any longer in it? Or do you not know that as many of us as were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? Therefore we were buried with him through baptism into death, that Jesus, as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in the newness of life." And those stones, underneath that water, they were walking away from. God was burying their old life. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how many of us, we might think, oh, we're an adult. Does baptism really matter? Is it really necessary? Yeah, it's really necessary. It's a command. It's a sacrament that the Lord asks us to do, communion and baptism. Listen to Ezekiel 36, verse 26 in closing. It says, "I will pour water over you and scrub you clean. I will give you a new heart, put a new spirit in you. I will remove the stone heart from your body and replace it with a heart that's God-willed, not self-willed. I will put my spirit in you and make it possible for you to do what I tell you to do and live by my commands." And it just made me think like our stony heart, just like their stone was buried, so our stony heart gets replaced with a heart that gives us the will to be able to do what God tells us to do. He's the one that gives us a new heart. He's the one that takes our stony heart away, but it gives us the ability to obey him. Whenever you have that doubt of, oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. Yeah, you can't. But Christ in you can. Philippians 4:13 says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me."